Depending on what you're going to use your 3D print for, you may want to get rid of some of the 3D printed lines, like the striations from each layer. Even the top layer sometimes may have openings due to the width of the line and the width of the piece. So one product that I do use, besides a lot of sandpaper, is XTC-3D. It's an epoxy that is marketed specifically for 3D printing. It's a self-leveling epoxy that is supposed to, take down, I think they claim like 80% of your sanding time. It's nice to remove a lot of those striations or really fill them in. It will also create puddles too if you're not careful. So depending on your detail, this product may not work for you. For what I'm using here, this 3D print is a coaster that is going to be used, and we're going to take a mold of it. So actually having some resin puddle in the corners and create little fillets will be really nice. XTC-3D comes with two liquids, a part A, which is a larger container, and a part B, which is half its size and volume. It also comes with a single 30 milliliter mixing cup, and it's broken down into milliliters. So it goes from 2.5 milliliters, 5, 7.5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and finally 30. So when you're thinking about how to weigh this resin out, it's by volume. So you want to make sure that you break it up into 2 parts of part A and 1 part of part B. Once you add part A and B together, there's an exothermic reaction. It will heat up. So once you mix it really well, you want to make sure that you spread that resin out on like a tray. I usually make one up out of wax paper or aluminum foil. And what that does is it kind of slows that process down, and then you can brush the liquid and it will have a longer work time. If you leave it in that single container, once you mix it and you don't spread it out, it will heat up, and that'll actually increase that exothermic reaction, and it'll set up faster. So it will decrease your work time. It also comes with a single sponge applicator and a single tongue depressor. I strongly advise you get a box of all of these. 1 cup is going to be such a small portion of what you get in these bottles, and you will probably go through 20 or 30 batches of this stuff. And is same with the applicators. You can't really clean these out well. They rip, they fall to pieces. So if you don't want to use tongue depressors, you can use the other end of a brush or the applicator itself. But get extras of these. It's going to get messy, and to clean these up is just going to be too much, and you're going to contaminate the work. And that's pretty much all I utilize. Some alcohol or acetone to clean up. Usually I use acetone. Also make sure you have some safety glasses, a well-ventilated area, and some safety gloves. You don't want to get the stuff on your skin or ingest it. Make sure you read all the safety warnings and read the package or the MSDS sheet online. If you look closely at the 2 liquids, part A is rather thick. It captures air bubbles. You don't have to mix this one, but part B is more closer to water, and you want to shake this up pretty good and make sure it's mixed up. I would start with part A. It's thicker. If you put a little bit too much of part B, you can dab it out of part B. Part A, you can't really clean that out. So start with part A, and if you go over too much, you can make that up in part B. Begin by slowly pouring part A in. And I'm going to go with a 15 milliliter batch. So that means I need to start with a 10 milliliter batch of part A. I'm going slow because the stuff is thick and it takes a little time to settle. So I'm going to start just shy of 10 milliliters and just kind of see what happens. It will likely level out. Add just a little bit more, and then close that up. Make sure you really get down and take a look at it. It's a little difficult to see when we try turning it. That's a little better. You can see I'm right at that 10 milliliter line. So now that it's settled down, we can take the part B and mix it until we get up to 15 milliliters. So that would be 10 milliliters of part A, 5 milliliters of part B for a total of 15. And go slow, because it's more like water. Give it a little time to level off. And if you need to get down there and take a look, you know, get down at eye level and take a look. I'm also looking at the back side of the cup and I can see the line through there. Make sure you've got your gloves on and start mixing. As soon as these mix together or they touch, they're going to start to cure. You want to make sure your measurement is accurate. A lot of these resins depend on a very accurate measurement. So I make sure I try to get it all mixed in first, because if you go too fast and just start mixing quickly, the part B, which is more like water, will slosh out and then it'll mess up your mixture. And then once I get it all mixed in, then I'll go a little faster. And you can see how this would be difficult with a 30 milliliter mixture. You'd be at the top, it's really hard to mix something like that. So if you need larger batches, get bigger cups. But try this out first, because unless you're printing on a large printer and you have a huge print, like a 15 milliliter batch is going to be great, especially for what we're doing. I'll have some left over. But it's also really hard to accurately measure and mix a really tiny batch too, because you still lose some of that material onto the walls. And if you notice, I am scraping the sides. This is not so sensitive of a resin that you need to transfer it to another container like some smooth-on products, some rubbers. But it is, you still want to make sure you mix it up really well. So I created a small tray out of aluminum foil, something you might cook a burrito in the oven, not the microwave. And I got my product mixed up, and you don't want to wait. You want to make sure that you get this mixed up and pour it out right away. Make sure that you already have your tray. And just make sure you get as much as you can. The little container, and make sure you scrape the sides and you get as much off there as you can. But don't waste too much time, because you're going to need to work somewhat quickly. It starts to set up. If you mixed it properly, you should have, I don't know, 20 minutes of good work time. Check the box for the mix times. So let's bring in our piece here. I have a lot of tongue depressors for this product, and I'm just stacking them so that I can apply this resin and that it can drip off the sides. So I begin just by putting it on. And at some point you're going to have to get dirty, at least with something like this. Sure you don't get any drips. If you squish it out too much, you're going to get bubbles. And it's going to build up too. I'm less concerned about the striations on the outside on this particular piece. I can easily sand and get to. And I'm more concerned about all these little areas. I don't want it to puddle in those areas, but I do want it to fill in some of those voids. And now that I've used up most of my batch, I want to kind of look closely and see if there's any areas that it had puddled in. So we can come closer, dab some of that stuff up. I don't want this to puddle, but I do want to use it to fill in. If you look at the surface here, there's some open voids on the face of it because of the thickness of the bead of the print that's getting laid down and the surface area. So you may have gaps on the top surface. You might see an area where the hot end or that filament is dragging on the surface. You can see one right there a little bit. It's hard to see now that I got the resin on there. This reflects so much. And I don't want it to totally fill this stuff in, so really check those small areas. You know, you might need to squeeze that out if you over apply things, and just sponge that up. And you don't have to go really fast here for something this small, but if you had like 5 other pieces, you want to be moving a little quicker, because it might not set up in 10 minutes, but you do notice a change in its viscosity as you work. And so I'm going to squeeze out a little bit more, especially for these eyes. It's a little turtle. Make sure those eyes don't get filled in, because we're going to make a rigid mold of this with plaster or fiberglass or plastic, you know, a rigid material. This is going to be plaster for slip casting. And if those get too filled in, you'll completely lose those details, especially this line all through here. This really thin, we got to be careful. We might even lose that more than we want to. I don't really want to get the back side of it. I don't need to. If I needed to, then I'd have to figure out how, you know, I might have to do this in the front and the back, maybe drill a hole through it or something. But I just need to get the front, because again, this is going to be for the purpose of making a mold, and I don't really care what the back looks like. If it has some texture, it doesn't matter. I'm just worried about the front. So I'll come back in about 20 minutes, and once it's set up, if you've got a good mix, check the back of the box, but about an hour, it should be pretty well set up. Not ready for sanding, but it should be set up enough to be able to handle it and move it somewhere else. For sanding the front surface, I'm simply using a sheet of sandpaper on a flat surface and going back and forth. I'll start in one direction and then slightly change directions to identify any deep scratches or any pits. When you flip the piece over, you can see that the areas that you're sanding are white, and the areas that are a little deeper show up darker or filled in with that white debris. You want to make sure your surface is as flat as possible, and preferably you want to glue your sandpaper down to a piece of masonite or MDF. Otherwise, the sandpaper will want to lift, causing it to sand more in other areas. Make sure your piece is laying flat down and you don't rock back and forth, and you just keep it flat the whole time as you go parallel to the surface. Files can also be used. Here I'm using a half round. It's round on the top and then flat on the bottom. These are great for getting really flat surfaces on your prints if you're getting a lot of rocking or a lot of moving from sandpaper. So this can work on the edges as well as the flat surface on top. You can see here on the side where these areas are darker, there and there. Those areas are where the file is not hitting the print. So you don't want to just aim for those areas. You want to keep filing the entire area, the whole surface, keeping your file flat against that surface until you get down. You don't want to just go up and down with the file and rock it against the edges. You want to keep it flat against that surface. As you keep making your way around, look for any depressions, which can be seen here in that darker color. Make sure that you're not filing in the way if they're supposed to be there. If you look at the design from the top, those areas actually dip in, and they're supposed to dip in. So don't just keep filing until you get down to those and file those away. Go in there with some sandpaper and file those by hand. The file is really great for getting in really sharp corners and creating a nice line, a nice visual line there. You can see that there's a burr that starts to form. It's this white fuzzy looking plastic. Especially with files, it tends to chew that up and peel that plastic over. You can easily get rid of it by just filing towards it. Filing against it, not angling your file, it'll just peel it over the top. You can also use a burnisher. In this case, I'm just using my fingernail and as a burnisher and just scraping that away. So keep going, keep hitting the top edge, you can hit the side edge, but don't tilt your file. File is really great for large surfaces as well. Where you use sandpaper you might rock, a file can keep a really flat surface. So just make sure that the file engages the entire surface, not just one area or one edge. If you do have an edge that you tend to rock over, just change positions, change directions where the file is mostly in contact with the piece. This will keep it from rocking over the edge. You can change directions if you need to, also to identify any low spots or any spots that have heavier tool marking in them. Those lower spots I'm not going to hit with a file. I'm going to use like a sanding stick. So just work with the very top broad surfaces. You can see that there are some gaps. You want to have to fill those in with either an epoxy or some Bondo or something like that. Don't try to file down to those. As you make your way around to other edges, just make sure that you keep that file flat. I can't stress that enough, that you keep the file against the entire surface and then you don't just file one single edge. Now when you're working with a corner where your file wants to slip off, you want to just slow down, make sure that file is really flat against that surface, and just go slow around that edge. Your file's still going to slip once in a while, but if you can go slow, maintain that flat position, and just continue that stroke into the corner and around the other edge. You can see here when I first start to file, just the very top edge and the very bottom edge are white. So that means that whole middle area is a little further down. And that makes sense with how the print works. The bottom edge tends to flare out where it comes into contact with the table, and the top edge tends to flare out a little bit as the print does that final pass. So just keep the file flat. Keep hitting that edge and work it until the entire surface, keep working that entire surface until it's all kind of like white and dull like that. One of my favorite finishing tools is this little sanding stick. It comes with a variety of different sandpaper, and here you can see I'm using pretty rough, maybe like a 120 or something. And I'm just going after those edges in the same way I would with a file. Try to keep that whole surface flat, and you can see the top and the bottom edge go white first. And just like with the file, I want to keep sanding that area, that entire area, until the whole surface is flat. Don't just take the tip of that tool and dig it in there just to try to sand those areas flat. Unlike with the file, you'll notice I am going up and down with the sanding stick because you can go in both directions. It doesn't really matter. A file is a single direction. You can only go in one direction. Otherwise, you're not really doing much when you go on the backstroke. With the sanding paper, you can go any direction and it will file. Keep that sanding stick flat, and you notice the top edge and the bottom edge, as I mentioned before, are the only two things getting hit because they slightly flare out. So just keep sanding until you get the whole surfaces white, and you get a consistent surface. These sanding sticks are really great to get into these lower surfaces as well, where you can't get a file, and sandpaper with your finger would just round off those edges. I start going in one direction to try to identify any low spots. I'll change directions. This is to identify low spots, but it's also to create to keep from creating any low spots. If you go in a single direction in one area, you could end up creating a low spot by sanding that same, like almost like a path you walk through grass. So if you change directions, that'll help from creating a single low spot in one place. So just keep changing directions and make your way around. Start with a heavier grit sandpaper and then move to a lighter grit.